Hi guys, today I'm coming to you from an undisclosed location that is totally not my garage. No chance it's my garage. Secret underground location, that's what I'm sticking with. Anyway, today we're going to talk about making paper negatives. And I figure it's something that might be kind of fun while we're all stuck inside with this quarantine thing. Now, paper negatives are basically exactly what they sound like. They are a negative that you can shoot in your camera made out of photographic paper. So I'm going to be using just regular Ilford paper. So you can use any sort of photographic paper, any of it will work. So basically this will turn your photographic paper into something you can shoot in a camera. And a lot of people like to use it with 4x5 cameras because it's very easy to cut them in sheets. And I do that all the time as well. You can use a 4x5 film holder and just cut it to the right size and slide it in and do this tutorial just like everything else. But just to make things a little harder on myself, I'm actually going to cut some down and load it up to shoot in a medium format camera. You can actually cut it down to almost anything. You can cut down even to 35mm, but the tricky part with 35mm is a lot of cameras won't pull the film without sprocket holes, and your paper's not gonna have sprocket holes. There's a couple of ways you can get around that, but I don't think I'm gonna go into them in this tutorial. Anyway, we're gonna get started. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the lights, and we're gonna show you how to do this. I'll be right back. Okay, we're in the dark now with my safe light on. And I'm going to apologize, the video is going to be a little bit grainy, but it is very, very dark in here. And this is just about the best you can get with high ISO on this camera. Okay, so a couple of things that we're going to do here. First, we're going to open up the Ilford paper. Now, because we're under safe light, we can do all of this where we can see, which is a pretty big advantage for when you're trying to cut stuff down. You can absolutely do this somewhere where you do not have a safe light, like a bathroom with no windows or your own garage. But I happen to have my garage set up as a darkroom, so I have a safe light. So what I'm going to do is I am going to eyeball about how long it will take me on a film spool, and we're going to cut a strip out of the paper that'll fit on that spool. And you can just use any pair of scissors you happen to have laying around the house. It doesn't really matter. Photographic paper is just paper. Okay, then I'm going to take a spool, and I've got a little piece of electrical tape here. I'm just going to tape it to the end of the spool. I'm going to tape it with the emulsion side in, and if you're not familiar with photographic paper, the shiny side is the emulsion. And then I'm just going to spool it onto the paper, or wind the paper onto the spools, pardon me. Now, because I'm not putting any sort of backing paper on this, you're going to want to load your film back, or whatever camera you're using, in the dark as well. You could totally recycle a piece of backing paper from some medium format 120 film, and you'd be totally fine. You'd be totally fine to load it in the dark, but I have not done that, which means I have to load this in the dark. Okay, and you load it just like you would any other film. And then because I'm wanting to get on the other spool, I'm going to cut the corners off of this so that it spools on just like you would expect it to. See if I can find the slot here in the dark. Okay. And it'll wind onto the spools just like any other film will. Now, you don't have to worry about looking for a start mark because the whole thing is film, so you're not going to have to worry about that. I'll put this back in here. It's a little bit stiffer than regular film, so you may have some problems getting the film back into the rest of the holder. Just be careful as you move it and you should be fine. Okay, so that's light tight. Now we're going to make sure that we put the rest of the paper back in the dark sleeve here. Fold it over and put it back in the envelope so we don't ruin it when I turn the lights back on. Okay, so my paper is safe, my film back is loaded. We are going to go outside and we're going to shoot a couple of shots on this. And before we do so, I'll just mention that most paper will be about ISO 6, so it's very, very slow. We will talk towards the end about some ways that you can speed that up a little bit, but for now I'm just going to shoot this at ISO 6 and we're going to show you how that works. So let's go out and shoot. Okay, we're back. So what I have done is I've gone out and shot this roll of paper negatives in my Hasselblad 2000 FCM. Shot a couple pictures in my car and a self-portrait. In the tray here I have some Caffenol because I have run out of paper developer, and Caffenol works okay as a paper developer. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the back and we're going to take out our roll of paper negatives. And if everything went okay, we should have a fun bunch of images on this little spool of paper here. Okay, I'm going to unwind this. I'm going to take the piece of electrical tape that I used to hold it to the spool off of the end. We're going to flatten it out and we're going to stick it in the Caffenol. And you're going to want to try to get all of it covered in developer as fast as you can. And you might not be able to see it in the image, but I have another tray with fixer over on the side, which will be our next step. And you can go just right from the developer into the fixer. Now this Caffenol is a little bit weak, so it might take a little while for us to actually be able to see the images. I'm just rocking it back and forth. I didn't make a ton, so I'm kind of using an agitation here to keep the film coated. I think I'm starting to see some images coming up. Yep, I'm definitely starting to see some images. Now, just like if you were doing a print, this will develop in any print developer. And you're going to have a little bit of a hard time probably, unless you're used to printing, telling exactly how far to go in the developer. I like to go until they look fairly dense, but it's kind of up to you depending on what you want for your contrast. Yeah, I've got some good images coming up now. I can tell it unspooled a little bit inside the camera. They're not quite straight on the film strip. It could also be that I just didn't cut the film strip very straight. It looks like with the wind-up I got about 3 on here. And depending on what size of paper you cut down, you might get more. We're about done. So we're just going to go right over into the fixer. And that's probably long enough for the fixer there. Okay, I'm going to go turn the lights on so I can show you what that looks like, and I will be right back. Okay, we got the lights back on, and we'll grab my film strip there. And you can see I have several images on that film strip, just like you would on a regular piece of film. So because these ones aren't very interesting, for the next couple of steps, I'm going to go grab a paper negative that I shot earlier with one of my 4x5 cameras, and we'll show you a couple of things that you can do with them that might be kind of interesting to you. So I'll be right back. Okay, so earlier I went out with one of my 4x5 cameras and I shot a paper negative on the same paper using the same development process, just to kind of give you an idea of some of the stuff you can do. And I figured this would be a little easier to show on camera. So this is a 4x5 paper negative of the back of my car. Basically, it is the same as you would get for any 4x5 print, except it's obviously negative because it was shot in camera. So the first thing I'm going to show you that you can do is you can do a contact print with these. Now there's a couple ways you can do that. You can take the piece of papers and sandwich them together with the negative on top, stick them under an enlarger if you have one, and flash the lights. But because a lot of you don't have enlargers at home, I'm going to show you kind of the MacGyver way of doing a contact print. So I'm going to get set up, we're going to go back in the dark, and I'll show you how we're going to do it. Okay, we're back in the dark for our next step. So we're going to make a print from the negative that we just made. So what I've done is I've taken the sheet that we cut up before, and I've cut a chunk that is about 5x7 out of the rest of the page. I like to use a piece that's a little bit bigger than the 4x5 negative because the outer edge will turn black and create kind of a matte, which I think is kind of a nice look. It's also kind of a good way to time your print and get an idea how far it's gone. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our negative and we're going to place it face down. Make sure this is, yeah, you want to make sure your paper is face up, obviously, and the shiny side on the paper will be up. So we're going to go face down as close as we can get to the middle of the paper. Now I've taken a sheet of glass from a picture frame. We're just going to lay it right on top here. And that's going to hold the negative as flat as possible against our piece of paper. Now, if you have an enlarger, the easiest way to do the next step is to just use your enlarger and expose through that. But I'm going to assume, since we're all stuck in quarantine, that most of you don't have enlargers. And so we're going to do this kind of the MacGyver style. I'm going to go flip the overhead lights on. So you ought to be able to see when I do this, when the camera goes bright. And we're going to do it for a surprisingly long amount of time. We're going to go about 2 seconds. So here we go. Now we're doing that long because the paper is very thick and we're exposing through the paper. But if we did that right, we should have a really nice exposure for this. So we're going to lift the glass off and put it aside. Lift the negative off. And obviously you can't see anything on the picture yet because we haven't developed it. So we're going to grab a developer tray over here. Now the Caffeinol I was using earlier exhausted, so I've mixed up a batch of HC110, which is obviously a film developer, but it works okay as a paper developer as well. Most people just don't use them because they're more expensive than paper developers are. So we're going to slide this in and we're going to rock back and forth. Now when this starts developing, you should start seeing the edges turning black because they were exposed around the negative and got the most light exposure. This is the tense part of darkroom printing, because that's really what we're doing, is just regular darkroom printing. It's waiting for the first hint of an image. And I'm starting to see the edges turn black, and I can see a square in the middle where the negative laid, but I don't actually see any image yet, which is totally fine. The edges are a very, very light gray, which means development is happening, but we're still very early in the development process. As those darken up, we should start to see images in the middle as well, where our negative was at. Now, if you're printing with an enlarger, you should probably use contrast filters, because this was a RC paper that's multi-grade, which means that you can adjust the contrast with filters. Since I used an overhead light, there's not a lot of way to adjust the contrast with filters, and you're just going to kind of end up with a little bit lower contrast print, and there's not a lot you can do about it. But if it's something that bothers you, you can always go get an enlarger and do it a little more officially. So the edges are starting to turn very black, which is good, and I'm starting to see just a hint of the actual image in the middle. So the picture in the middle is starting to become clear. I'm starting to be able to see the opposite of the negative that we put in there. And if I timed my print right, we should have a very, very nice print by the end of this. The image is starting to come up and it's starting to provide detail. You ought to be able to see it probably with the camera by now. Yeah, we're starting to get a really nice image there. I think that was pretty close to the exposure I expected it to be. One thing about darkroom printing, if you've never done it, is oftentimes things will look darker in the image in the dark than they do when you pull them out in the light. So I like to always go to where my print looks just a little darker than I think it should, and usually it ends up coming out about right. Yeah, my highlights are coming up and I'm starting to see details in the background. My print's starting to look really nice. We're going to go just a couple more seconds here, and then we'll be going into the fixer for the next step. And that'll stop the development process. I hope you guys all find this as exciting as I do. I'm kind of a darkroom nerd, and I really like watching the picture develop. Some people find it a little bit boring. It looks like I've developed about to completion. I'm not really getting any more development, which means that that's probably just about all I'm going to get on this print, so we're going to stop there. Sometimes they will stick to the bottom of the tray, and you got to be careful. The emulsion's a little soft, and you can actually scratch it if you're not careful. So we're going to pull it out and take this tray over here that's got my fixer in it. Shake my developer off, and we're just going to go right into the fixer. After a couple of seconds in the fixer, it is safe to turn the lights on. So I'm going to set this aside and we're going to go turn the lights on and we'll get you a good picture of what this looks like in the light. So we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So here's the print that we just made in the light. You can tell because I used the overhead light for exposure that it is a little bit low contrast. If I had gone actually a little bit longer time, I probably would have ended up with a little bit better contrast. But all in all, it's a really nice print, and especially for just using things that are around the house and no official darkroom equipment, it worked out really nice. Now, a couple other things that you can do with this. There is a method called pre-flashing, which allows you to take the paper and stick it under a darkroom enlarger and expose it to light so that it actually comes right up to the level right before it starts actually developing actual image. Now, the reason you do that is because it increases the speed of the film so that you're no longer stuck at ISO 6, you can be at a faster speed. But honestly, I don't do that method that often because it takes a lot of trial and error for the film or for the paper that you're using to figure out what your pre-flash time is. And I don't find that I mind it being at ISO 6 all that much. Shooting slow is kind of fun sometimes. Another thing you can do that's a lot of fun is to use the black and white reversal process that I have shown in some of my other tutorials. You can do that with a piece of paper and go direct positive. So you can go right out of the camera to a print with no exposure in between. That's super cool and a lot of fun. There's two downsides to it. Your image will be reversed if you do that, which for most things doesn't matter, but if it's things with text, you'll notice it. And also that you only get the one print. You can't use the negative to make multiple prints then. You also can just take that negative, toss it in your scanner and scan it, or shoot it with your phone or shoot it with your DSLR and invert the image and get a really nice digital copy that way as well if you decide you don't want to print them in the darkroom. Anyway, there's lots of other ways you can use this process, and I'm sure that I'll probably have tutorials on some of them in the future. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching, guys.